Right, exactly. Yeah, Frankie Crocker was huge, and he wasn't giving you facts about the music. He was just going like let it flow, and that was what was so beautiful about him. You know, Frankie Crocker was. It's so cool you brought him up because he was the disco DJ. He brought the sound. I mean, he brought Soul Makossa to New York, so he really understood it, and I understood those DJs, and maybe because I was so young, it made sense.
Mm.
So you discovered disco by the radio on the
Right.
radio, but you were too young to be going to these clubs that
Far too young, but I would
Yeah.
like the guys who would work with my dad like went to the clubs, and this is like way before Studio 54, you know. So these are small, very small venues, and God knows what they were doing, you know, because they weren't telling me exactly what they were doing. So it was but you know, it was just the idea that there was this, you went to New York and there was this different kind of lifestyle. And that's what always kind of got me, was like, and even as I followed further underground, it's like, you know, as in this later 70s, it wasn't like I didn't like the Bee Gees, because I understood that they had this whole history as kind of like the Australian Beatles, and I kind of understood that, and the music was really tight, but I was already found this new underground, which was kind of punk rock, because around the corner from my dad's place in the Lower East Side was CBGB's, which of course fits into Blondie and, you know, all that kind of stuff, you know. So it's a little complicated, but I inherently understood rock and disco.
Yeah. Did you go to any, were there underage clubs? Like as a, 15-year-old, you can.
Yeah, well, not that my dad would let me go to. There were
I'm sure the Beastie Boys were going to all these underground clubs. You're probably around.
well, they were even too young for that.
Yeah.
I would say this is because they're probably about 2, 3. No, they're about my age. So I don't think any of these people are really going to the original discos.
Yeah.
Were they going to Studio 54 in 1977? Perhaps.
Well, Drew Barrymore got in.
Yeah. Well, it was that was like something that was kind of unattainable for me, because also there's this, I don't know if this is kind of a nuance, but you know, we were downtown and that was uptown.
Yeah. No,
and uptown is kind of like fancier, right, and classier, and Lower East Side kind of embraces this kind of dirtiness, grittiness, I should say.
Yeah.
Yeah. So, and it was very working class, and so, you know, I have these dual roots, which are kind of, I've tried to analyze it over the years, and it doesn't make total sense, but the idea is that I was hanging with one of the guys who worked for my dad had a couple of kids my age, but I was staying in like housing projects with them, you know, so it was not really like, we weren't going out to fancy clubs or anything, you know, so it was a very different world. But I inherently understood that there were these two different worlds. I think that's the key point.
Yeah.
That I understood that there was a New York way and then there was like a suburban way.
And when did you manage to get into CBGBs? What was your first, how old were you?
I would go to CBGBs because, and a lot of places, just because nobody upheld the drinking law.
Yeah.
So, you know, I'd be 13, 14 years old in a bar. And there were a lot of times I'd go to CBGBs and not actually see the show because I had to go home. but I was there during the sound check, and like I know, like as I got older, like people in Blondie and talking heads would be like, they'd like point at me. They'd be like, I know you, but it wasn't. And also, here's a crazy one, was that in that building on the floor above us is a very industrial building. There was a band that used to practice that I was terrified of. And they just made this sound that I didn't know who they were. But I used to always see them outside. And many years later, I realized that was Talking Heads.
Yeah.
And they had this guy who would stare at me, and that was David Byrne. Right. So
Yeah. And you
so
look,
I was very close to it all, but I was too young. I was just, they'd almost laugh at me. But I would drink at these places. I would go where I could get served, which was pretty much anywhere, basically, so my dad would work the extra 3 hours and I'd be getting, plastered at 13.